Is it time to expand MARTA? Tonight we'll talk with two senators who say yes. But what does this plan mean for taxpayers? We'll break it down. Plus, the South Carolina presidential primary is set for Saturday. After that, expect the political ground game to come to Georgia. Let the attack ads begin. Lawmakers starts right now. Welcome to Lawmakers. I'm Bill Nigut. It is day 23 of the 2016 session of the General Assembly. Crossover Day is fast approaching. Before we talk to our guests, let's head down to the Gold Dome for a status check with Shelby Lin. She has tonight's Capitol report.
You're right, Bill. Crossover Day is almost here. It's just a little more than a week away. Topping our Capitol report tonight, a very spirited debate on the floor of the Senate. At issue, whether high school athletes can wear religious symbols on their sporting gear. This all started with a simple headband. Last spring, a young Georgia cross-country runner was disqualified from a track meet because he had a biblical verse on his headband. The incident launched an effort by state lawmakers to force the Georgia High School Association to change its rules to allow such religious expression. Senator Burt Jones presented the bill.
This is very much needed, and we have asked them for this, and the only reason we're having to write a law is because they seem to not sometimes agree with that oversight committee. Isn't that unusual? But is that not true?
Yes, ma'am. You're exactly right, Senator. It is something that we have tried to not get to this point with the association.
But Senator Harold Jones opposed the bill because he believes focusing only on religious expression is dangerous.
It is facially only allowing speech that deals with religion. And I do see where it says personal and voluntary religious experience. Possibly that could be read to mean that all forms of speech are permitted. But I don't believe that the history of this bill shows that. The reason why this bill was developed doesn't show it. The sponsoring senator did not mention that. And secondly, I don't believe that this body is about to open up the floodgates that any particular speech can go on athletic wear, because we can obviously see where that is going to be headed.
If there was a student who wanted to write on their headband, "I love ISIS," and they based that on their religious beliefs of a caliphate, of establishing a caliphate at some time in the future, that would be, under this bill, religious speech that would have to be allowed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Allowing a non-uniform expression, I just say not all members of the team were wearing Nike, Adidas, or whatever, and that logo is allowed. They're not uniform. Not all members of the team wearing the same thing means non-uniform. And if we're going to allow a non-uniform expression, then we ought to allow a non-uniform expression that is of the person's choosing.
We need to adopt Senate Bill 309 because it deals with the fact that religious expression under the current rule is treated as a second-class right. And Senate Bill 309 fills in that gap.
But in the end, when it was time to vote, SB 309 passed by a margin of 39 to 16. It now goes to the House for review. Meanwhile, over in the House today, it was decision time for HB 927. That's the bill that would add 2 more justices to the state Supreme Court. It would also change some of the types of cases that go before the court.
This bill is not a legislative hot dog. It is a legislative plate of vegetables. It's not real exciting, but it is very important.
Representative Christian Coomer presented the bill, acknowledging that some might consider it a boring subject. But he says it's clear the change is needed because the state high court has a large caseload and needs more help. Other representatives were quick to agree.
By adopting this law and passing this bill, we're actually going to streamline that process so that we're getting justice to folks that need a resolution to their case, both at the Court of Appeals or at the Supreme Court.
It's about time we updated the jurisdictional requirements for both benches of the for our appellate court, Supreme Court and appellate court, and that's exactly what this does. And at the end of the day, this will expedite justice for Georgians and make our judicial system more effective.
The bill was approved on a vote of 120 to 45. It now goes to the Senate for consideration. Finally tonight, the bill to expand MARTA services in Metro Atlanta passed out of the Senate Transportation Committee today. The bill would let voters decide whether to pay an additional half-cent sales tax into Cobb and Fulton County. If approved by voters, the money could be used to fund an $8 billion expansion of MARTA. The expansion includes extending service north along 400 to Alpharetta and east to Lithonia. Now, Bill, I know you have Senator Brandon Beach on the show tonight, and since he's the author of the MARTA expansion measure, I know you'll find out all about it. That's it from the Capitol. Back to you.
Thanks, Shelby. You know, last year saw the passage of HB 170, that big transportation funding act that we talked so much about last session. One critical transportation aspect, though, wasn't really addressed in that legislation, the potential for MARTA to be expanded. But a funding mechanism that could be used was included. Both of our guests tonight are very involved with the project this year. Senator Gloria Butler is a Democrat from Stone Mountain. And Senator Brandon Beach is a Republican from Alpharetta, and he is the sponsor of Senate Bill 330. Thank you both so much for being here.
Having us.
Senator Beach, we need to point out to our viewers that we are actually taping this show on Wednesday evening. And what that means is you, by the time we go on the air, you may very well have gotten a vote on this measure from the Transportation Committee, right?
Correct. Chairman Williams tells me we will get a vote tomorrow.
Okay, so we won't know the outcome. We'll see how that turns out. But let's go ahead, because there's a long way to go before this bill becomes reality. Let's back up, if we could, a step. Talk about how HB 170, which we just discussed, I just mentioned, paves the way for what you want to do now.
Well, first off, HB 170 was huge for the state of Georgia. And if you look at the momentum we have now in transportation, with the passage of HB 170, $1 billion of state funds that have no federal restrictions on them, then the governor in the amended budget put in another $700 million towards transportation. And then you look at the momentum we have with 3 P3s going on, 75 North by Northwest Corridor, 75 South, and just recently announced the 400-285 interchange, which actually came in $320 million below projection. So we have a lot of momentum in transportation. One thing we have not addressed in 18 years is transit expansion. And we have to have an overall strategy on transportation that includes transit. So that's why I am supporting Senate Bill 330.
And what is that potential mechanism that HB 170 put into play that you can now take advantage of, you hope?
Well, yeah, House Bill 170 allowed for the counties to come together and do a 1 cent SPLOS. But it's only for 5 years. So basically what we're doing in this bill, and I want to thank Senator Butler for being a co-sponsor on this. This is truly a bipartisan bill. When you look at what that half penny can do, we are going to flex it out of House Bill 170 into the MARTA Act for the duration of MARTA. That way you can bond against those projects to build the $8 billion worth of proposed projects. So, you know, HB 170 in 5 years, you couldn't build enough transit projects, so we had to go through the MARTA Act. But I want to be very clear, we're not raising taxes, we're not going above the cap, we're flexing a half of the penny out of the penny that was put in 170.
Okay, so it's interesting you mentioned the $8 billion price tag, and Senator Butler, I'll bring you in on this too. Last year, or earlier this year, when MARTA Chairman Robbie Ashe announced that he wanted to find a way to get $8 billion worth of funding to expand MARTA. It was sort of a breathtaking announcement. I'm not sure a lot of people thought that it was a realistic ambition, but you all feel like it's something you really can put in place, yes?
Obviously, yes. With Senate Bill 330, well, with 170 passing first, as you mentioned earlier, we'll be able to do that.
You know, one of the things that I find interesting about this is you both represent, it's not as if either of you are in-town legislators. You both live in areas where people for decades, I think, have probably felt that automobiles was the way they wanted to get around. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment, but as the cities grew, then we realized we need something other than cars.
And you even more, Senator Beach. You're up there in Alpharetta, where we would at least traditionally, typically think your constituents might be a little uncomfortable with public transit, and yet you're leading the charge.
Well, the reason I'm leading the charge is twofold. One, I think we need it for congestion relief and an increase in mobility for our citizens. Number two, pure economic development. If you look, the last big announcement, State Farm, Mercedes-Benz, Pulte Homes, all of them have located around transit. And we actually lost a company, Athena Healthcare, 600 jobs that moved from Alpharetta down to the Ponce City Market because all of their employees live down on the Beltline and in Virginia Highlands. Let me tell you what I'm seeing, Bill. I've been in economic development for 15 years. And 15 years ago, the CEO made the decision where to locate that company based on where he or she wanted to live. So if he or she wanted to live in Golf Club of Georgia, they were going to Windward, okay? You fast forward to today, that CEO is still making the decision, but he or she's making it based on where the talent lives. Right. And if the talent's on the Beltline, they're going to the Beltline.
Why don't we look at the proposed expansion of MARTA? There are several routes. We've got a map up there right now. But let me ask each of you to talk about it. Senator Beach, let me start with you. One of the proposals expands MARTA northward, correct?
Right, from North Springs to Windward Parkway.
To Windward Parkway. So it takes it way far up.
Correct.
And the reason for Windward Parkway is you've got another large concentration of commuters all up and down that corridor, right?
Exactly. And you have, just in the technology front, we have 900 technology companies between 285 and Windward. So we have a lot of millennials that are going to want to take transit. So I think it's a key factor in us, doing the North Fulton project.
And then there's another expansion, I-20 East, going how far out?
Out to Stonecrest, from Atlanta to Stonecrest.
Stonecrest, the shopping center.
Yes.
Out there, outside, a couple miles outside the perimeter, I guess you'd say.
Yes.
Okay.
And there are, there's lots of shopping. There are hotels, there are restaurants, and so people can travel from Atlanta to Stonecrest. Those that in that area can travel back to Atlanta.
One of the things that I know has gotten a lot of attention, and some people are very excited about, is the we're calling the Clifton Corridor.
Correct.
Describe what the Clifton Corridor is.
Well, that's a great project because it really gets you to the two job centers that are very important, Emory University and Emory Hospital and the CDC. And it's going to be probably the toughest one to build from a topography and geographical standpoint, but they can do it with light rail, and I think it's going to be a real plus for that area. So
I don't know if we can show it, if you see it well or not on the map, but we're talking about a line that essentially, does it in fact run from I-20 on the south end northwest up to the Lindbergh station? Is that basically what I think it does? And cuts through, as you say, that Emory neighborhood, Clifton Road.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's say we go ahead and, this measure passes. And I want to come back in a minute to talking about what the obstacles are. Are there projected dates for when we're going to be able to see some of this realized?
What about the dates?
Well,
don't everybody jump in at once.
Well, let me tell you what's going to happen. If we pass it out of the General Assembly, then what will happen is it'll trigger such dates that by May 31st, MARTA has to present to the county commissions a project list, very similar to an E-SPLOS, where you're going to get a new high school, a new middle school, a new elementary school.
The other thing, and it has to go on the ballot for the people to vote.
Well, that was the next thing I was going to ask you.
Then what will happen is, to Senator Butler's point, after they look at the project list, everybody agrees on the project list, the county commission has to vote on it to go to referendum, and then the people have the final say.
Well, and you just described precisely why I said you've still got a long way to go on this thing. You have to convince, first you got to get it through the legislature, then the counties involved in this have to vote on it, the commissioners have to vote to pass it through to the people who are their constituents. So this is a long process. Where do you stand in this first stage? You're going to get a vote on committee, which will have happened by the time we're on the air, you hope. What do you think the odds are right now that this is going to actually get through the General Assembly this session?
I feel very confident we'll get it through the Senate and get it over to the House.
And what do you imagine happens when it hits the House?
Well, you know, I don't have a crystal ball in the House, but I can tell you that I do think, again, the people are ahead of the politicians on this, and I think we haven't invested in transit. If we're going to be a world-class international city and a region, we have to invest in transit. And so I think we're at a point where we need to do this, to have an overall strategic transportation plan.
Yeah, Senator Butler, you know, we all talked before the show started about my observation that it seems to me that embracing transit is in some ways a cultural matter. I grew up in Chicago, lived in New York, lived in cities where everybody took transit all the time. When I talk, and so I think of it as a part of life that I wish I could take advantage of here.
That's right.
When I talk to my friends who grew up in Atlanta, who have never had transit, they tend to be really, they don't understand it. And some of them, because they don't understand it, really hate the idea. They want their cars and they want more roads. Am I right that it's somewhat cultural?
That is correct. I grew up in Daytona Beach, and we had buses, but I never took the bus. I always drove my car. Well, whenever I moved here, I lived in D.C., where there's the Metro. I really, really enjoyed the Metro because I could go anywhere I wanted to without getting in a car, without being in the congested traffic.
Yeah.
And so I think when minds change, when we get this thing going, then I think people will really, really love it. I'm hoping they will.
Yeah, and I think the behavior will change when we get them to where they want to go. And I've been a proponent that if it's gets you where you want to go, it's convenient, and it's clean, and most of all safe, people will use it as an option. I think one of the best examples was back in 1996. Everybody thought we were going to have horrible traffic during the Olympics. Everybody took a bus to the venues. Yeah. We had no traffic. And so we need to do some of that and change the behaviors. We're going to have a situation up in North Fulton. When they break ground in 12 months on that 400 to 285 project, it's going to be a nightmare for 3 years. It's going to take 3 years to construct. So maybe we can use that to get people onto transit and buses and different things with Greta, and use that as an experiment to get people to change their behavior.
I asked you about how you thought things would go in the House, and of course you can't predict the House. You can only be responsible for hoping you can deal with the body that you work in. But you do have some opponents over there, some folks up in the Johns Creek area who somehow feel they're going to have more traffic because there's a MARTA expansion up their way. What do you say when you hear that?
Well, I mean, that is why we have that $1 billion from the House Bill 170 to help build some of those surface roads and get some of the arterial roads built and reduce congestion in those areas. Let me say this. All the mayors and county commissioners have been meeting, and yesterday was pretty historic. They voted 18-1 in support of Senate Bill 330.
Right.
One mayor voted against it.
Right.
So we feel like that things are coming together. And I would say this to you, Bill. I've been involved in transportation for a long time. Former GDOT board member, now been in the Senate. I have never seen the spirit of cooperation amongst the agency heads. And they're looking at it not just from their little fiefdoms. They're looking at it, what's best for the customer, what's best for the citizen. From GDOT to Greta to MARTA to ARC, everybody's around a table and working together for what's best for our citizens.
All right, well, it's going to be really interesting to watch how this legislation moves forward throughout the session. So thanks for that conversation. We have to take a break right now. But when we come back, are you ready for some political football? After South Carolina and Nevada, Georgia is one of the next big states on the campaign stop. How will Super Tuesday, or what we're calling the SEC primary, play out here? But first, time to find out how well you know your lawmaker. Taylor Bennett is a Democrat representing House District 80. He was sworn into the General Assembly just last year. Bennett's a native of St. Louis, Missouri, but came to Georgia to play football at Georgia Tech, where he was the quarterback. He went on to play for the European Football League, where he still holds every passing record. He's now an attorney And Bennett says he always wanted to clerk for a Supreme Court justice. He also calls himself a big Taylor Swift fan. We're back with more Lawmakers in a moment. On this date in 1862, 10 Georgians, representing each of Georgia's 10 congressional districts, were sworn in at the first Confederate Congress in Richmond, Virginia. Welcome back to Lawmakers. Here with us tonight, Senator Gloria Butler and Senator Brandon Beach. The Senate is well represented on Lawmakers tonight. Thank you both for being here. I want to very quickly refer back to something that last night happened on Lawmakers. Senator Josh McCoon was on, and of course, he is a very, very passionate advocate for his religious liberty bill, SB 129, which has been a controversial bill from the start. He did say last night, we talked about the fact that that the Pastor Protection Act, which the House passed and was the Speaker's bill, came over to the Rules Committee in the Senate, and the Rules Committee attached to it Greg Kirk's bill called the First Amendment Defense Act, which some people think is a little bit less palatable in terms of how it views dealing with gays and lesbians. All right. That said, Senator McCoon last night said that the Metro Atlanta Chamber and the Georgia Chamber have actually signed off, that they like combining the two bills. I just want to say that what we've learned today is that the chambers are working with legislators to see if they can perfect language that will make the bills acceptable. They haven't really quite endorsed this bill, and we just want to make that correction on the show tonight. But let me ask you, Senator Butler, before we talk presidential politics, about something interesting that Senator McCoon said last night. He's been in a pretty big tussle with House, with staff members of the Speaker over in the House, and he said he thought the atmosphere in the legislature was meaner and that hardball was being played bigger than he'd ever seen it before. I found that interesting. Is that your experience down there? Are things tougher than ever all of a sudden?
They're tougher because of these bills. This fodder, as they call it, is not about freedom of religion. It's a freedom to discriminate with people that don't disagree with what you agree with.
Well, he was suggesting that House leadership particularly was really trying to get people on both sides of the building to toe the line, and if they got out of line, they were going to come down on them pretty hard. Have you seen that? You can tell us.
No, I have not seen that.
All right, let me move on.
I have not seen
Let me move on. Yesterday, your colleague, Senator Vincent Fort, switched his presidential endorsement from Hillary Clinton, who he had supported, to Bernie Sanders. He actually introduced Bernie Sanders at Sanders' rally at Morehouse College. The primary's coming right at us. Have you made an endorsement? Have you picked a candidate in this race?
I have not vocally picked a candidate.
Do you want to talk to us about that tonight? We'd be glad to give you an opportunity.
I can pick a candidate if you'd like me to.
Sure.
Well, I choose Hillary.
Why?
Well, if you remember back in 2012, there were more women voting of race, gender. And I think Hillary has an excellent chance in Georgia, especially the women vote, the Black American, the African American vote as well. And I know that's why Bernie Sanders is coming here to see how many African Americans he can get to vote for him.
Yeah, well, they'll be down here in big numbers, all of them. Senator Beach, You declared for Jeb Bush fairly early on.
I was one of the early supporters for Jeb.
At a time when we thought there was no question he was going to be the big front runner. It's really interesting how that Republican race has developed, isn't it?
Well, it's narrowed down to 6, and I will tell you that I still believe in Jeb. I think that the reason I endorsed him, he's a very conservative governor, cut taxes 19 times in a state that does not have an income tax. He grew jobs, 1.3 million private sector jobs. He tackled school reform. He tackled foster care reform. And he lived through 8 hurricanes and tropical storms, and he showed leadership. And I would just tell you that one of the reasons I supported him also, I think governors make good presidents. I think they've got the executive experience needed to sit in that chair and make some tough decisions. So I'm still with Jeb, and I'll be with him till the end.
You know, the last Saturday night, the Republican debate was one of the nastiest food fights I think I've ever seen in politics. Just happened it was a Republican debate. It could have happened to Democrats, but it didn't. It happened to Republicans. How are you as a Republican feeling about what all this is doing to the Republican brand?
Well, I do worry about that. I worry about Republicans eating their own, if you will, and you know, we're going to have to come together when we pick a candidate and get behind that candidate if we want to take the White House, and that's our goal, is to take the White House. So we need to make sure that we don't hurt ourselves so badly and bloody ourselves up so much that we can't coalesce and come back together and get behind a candidate.
Do you think that it's possible that Jeb Bush could, in Saturday's GOP primary in South Carolina, do well enough to come into Georgia with a little bit of momentum that might push him forward?
I think that's what Jeb is hoping for, is that you know, they are very well liked in the Bush family in South Carolina. His brother's done well there. His dad did well there. And they're hoping to come out in a strong position to carry that momentum into the Nevada caucuses and then into Super Tuesday.
So, Senator Butler, in the same way, I'll ask you this question. Hillary Clinton seems to be facing, once again, you know, she went through it in 2008 running against Barack Obama, and now she's got Bernie Sanders, an opponent who she never saw coming, an opponent who she never expected would challenge her in a major way. And Bernie Sanders is has pushed her to the left. How worried are you that even if she emerges as the nominee, she's been pushed to liberal positions that are going to make it harder for her to win a general election?
Well, you know, Hillary is battle tested. She can offer up solutions that she knows that she can make work. So I think she can hold her own and she'll do well.
Do you think Georgia will actually be a contested state in the fall campaign, whether it's Sanders or Clinton? Or is it pretty well a foregone conclusion that for the time being, this is a red state and Democrats aren't going to be spending their money trying to compete here?
Well, they're coming here, though.
Yeah, they'll be here for the primary. But, you know, I wonder, you know, if we're going to see much activity once we have 2 nominees, Senator Beach.
Yeah, no, I would agree that we're still a red state.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate both of you being here tonight. Senator Gloria Butler, Senator Brandon Beach. It's going to be really interesting to watch your MARTA bill as it moves forward this session. And congratulations to you, Senator Butler, on being one of the first signers, co-sponsors of this legislation. So thank you both very much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure.
So that's it for day 23. We have 17 legislative days to go in this year's session. For all the latest, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at GPB News, or check out our website, gpb.org/lawmakers. And you can catch Political Rewind live tomorrow at 3 p.m. on GPB Radio across the state. It's really a fun conversation about everything that's happening in politics. Thanks for joining us tonight. See you again on Monday.